I'm Rachel Rowland. I'm the daughter of Charlie Daniels here, and we're here today to talk about the importance of location when purchasing your church property. And Charlie is the president and founder of Churches by Daniels Construction. It's a construction company that specializes in churches and builds churches all over the United States. Dad, what made you get into the building business?
Well, Rachel, I was raised in the pastor's home. My dad pastored small churches in rural areas, and in doing so, a lot of times he was building onto them. A lot of times he would build the church or build the parsonage, and a lot of times he had a job where he was doing construction. So that put me navigating into the construction business at a really early age. And my dad was a worker, so he made us work. Whether we liked it or not, we would be on the site, working in the church, cleaning the church, doing all those things. So that's how I became in the building business. In doing that, you just learn a lot of things from the ground up. You learn about properties, you learn about buildings, you learn about where to build buildings, and that really brings us in today to talk about the location and the problems that we've seen over the years with building churches and how people buy properties. And the properties sometimes aren't usable. One of the properties I went to visit one time, the guy had put money down on a project that was $2 million. That was just the land. And I looked at it with him for, 2 or 3 hours, and just my assessment was that there was going to be wetlands problems, there was going to be easement problems, and there was going to be a flood zone. So I encouraged him right away. I said, Let's get a civil engineer in here. Let's look at this property and devise whether you're going to be able to buy it or not. And civil engineer came, went through the properties. It was unusable. And had he continued down that road, he would have had a piece of property for $2 million that he couldn't use. He did lose his money down. He'd put in a certain amount of money down, and he did lose that on the property. So those things are common in our industry and with people buying properties.
So what would you say is the first thing that a church needs to do when they're looking at a property and they think they found the perfect property for their church? What do they need to do next?
I've been looking at a piece of property for myself, and I like the property, I like the location, and now the first thing I'm going to do is get a civil engineer. And I'm going to have the civil engineer look at the zoning requirements, look at any wetlands, any easements, and that type of thing. So yes, hire the civil engineer first thing. Don't wait. Get him on the property and make sure there's no obstructions that can't be overcome.
And when looking at a civil, now we're a national construction company, so we work with churches all over the country. And obviously we think that works, or else we wouldn't do it. But what do they need to consider when hiring a civil? Would you recommend that they go with someone that's local, and why? Or would it be okay to go with someone on a national, broad basis?
I would go to somebody who's local for a couple reasons. One is they work with the municipalities there in the area, and they do it over and over again. Most of the guys who are local, they already know about your property. They know about the stream going through it. They know about if the soil's good under it. They have a good indication before they ever get there. We do work around the country, and so we would never tell you not to use a builder or an architect from your town because we do travel, and we feel like we do a good job with it. But we always hire a local civil engineer.
What will the civil look for? What are the things that they go through and that they're going to determine for the owner?
Well, Richard, they're looking for easements. They're looking for wetlands. They would go to the city and check out your zoning requirements, whether this property is zoned proper or whether it's not. Can it be rezoned to come up to the standard that you'd be able to do a church or have activities of a church there? They're looking at all the utilities, whether there's power on the site, whether there's water on the site, whether there's sewer. They're looking at the possibility of having to do retention on the site of water and wetlands. They will look into things like that. Sound funny to a lot of people, but like panther studies, the beetle studies, turtle studies, these type of things that are required by the federal government. They will look into like I said, your retention ponds. So hiring a civil engineer is a big deal. You got to get them on board early. They need to be throughout the process. They'll help you get all your permits. They'll make sure all those fees are paid. And that's not something that an architect or a person like myself can do. We can help out with it, but we can't do it.
A little bit more about some of the things that the civil does. For me, I'm in the building industry, but I am not actually in building. I do marketing, so I don't necessarily deal with this every day, just like most pastors wouldn't. And I know when my husband and I were looking to buy a property, you encouraged us, make sure to get a civil. You took one look at it, and there was a creek going through it. So that raised some red flags to you that there may have been some wetlands or some easements on that property. And once we went to the city and we talked with them, we ended up finding out that there may not even be enough space to build the building, and it was 2.5 acres worth of property. But after all the easements and the wetlands and the detention, and after they identified all that, there may not even be enough space left to build the building that we needed. So I'm sure this could happen to a church. What is a wetlands? What is an easement? What are some of these things? Let's explain it a little bit more.
A lot of times you run into easements you can run into setbacks. How far you set back from the street? If there's a gas line running across your property, that gas line has a certain easement. There can be telephone lines, there can be underground lines, and there can be lines that aren't even there. They don't exist. However, the phone company or the gas company will own an easement across your property, and you can't build on it. Sometimes you can go to that organization and like a gas company and have that removed if they don't have a gas line there. We looked at one locally one time, a pastor and I, nice looking piece of property, and it was just covered in major gas lines. I mean, these big high pressure gas lines. So there was no way to really build a large project on it. So it's not uncommon to have a site that looks really good, but when you delve into the legal side of the property, have a major easement going through it. And then zoning, it's just city regulations for what they want on that piece of property or in that area. And it may be zoned for residential, it may be zoned for multifamily, it may be zoned for commercial or industrial. And it's real important that a church, even though you could build there, you may not want to be in an area where they got concrete trucks next to you.
Yeah.
So you might buy a piece of property, you might get a really good deal and only find a manufacturing plant come in beside you 3 years later, and you got more dust than you can deal with. You almost got to have wash cars on Sunday. So those types of things are things you really need to look for. City regs, there's all kinds of city regulations. There's all kinds of city fees with a building project, and you really would need a close walkthrough with the city. We encourage people, churches, to go to the city early. As soon as we start dealing with plans or civil work, we have a sit-down meeting with the city and tell them what we want to do. Let them tell us why we can't or why we can, and how they would like to see things done. And as far as wetlands, wetlands is a government mandate, and there's certain properties that they deem as wetlands, and you may look at it and think that it don't look like wetlands, but it may come under their jurisdiction. And if it does, there's some things you can do. They're pretty expensive. And then when you get into flood zones is another whole issue. You'll see a little stream going across your property like y'all did. Mm-hmm. You think, man, that's really nice, and it'll look great, and we'll put a little bridge over it, and it'll be fine. And only to come to find out that little stream, there's a whole lot more to it than that.
Yes.
Or you think, well, we can just cover that up. Probably not. And there's different kinds of streams. There's some regulated by the flood people, FEMA. There's some who are not. Some are regulated by the Army Corps of Engineers. So then you start stepping into government agencies, and you know how long that takes you to get anything done.
And another item that we found out on our piece of property that has to do with this is, was there water there, and was there city sewer? And you kind of mentioned this before, but one thing they told us was that we may have to bring water, even though there was water there and we were in an area that was already built up. Would have to bring water across the road, which meant we're going to have to run a line under the main street, and I'm sure there's some costs associated with that because of the flood plain
Yes.
on the property. Then we couldn't do city, septic or sewer. It would have to be a septic, and then they weren't sure that we could use that because of the floodplain.
That's right.
So it affected everything about the property and how we used it. So what are some things and costs maybe associated with the utility part of it?
Yeah, one of the first things the civil will do, he'll look to see if you have utilities to the property. If you have gas, water, power, sewer, storm sewer, getting rid of water, and in him looking in that, you may be 100 yards from water, you may be 300 yards, you may be 5 miles, and you really need to look at that and add that cost to the property.
Yes.
Because you're going to have to run the water line. Because most of the churches we do today will end up with some sort of sprinkler system, and even if you could use the building off of well water, if you have to put in a sprinkler system, you're going to have to do a staged area where you have pumps and be able to store water. It gets really expensive. The best route for you is to be near the source, to where you have water to the property. And sometimes people think that this don't happen very often. It happens way more often than you think. A lot of properties we're running 200, 300, 400 feet, half a mile. A lot of properties we do that with, and that is an added cost, very expensive, and it's not on your site. Now it becomes a city project that you have to do and you have to pay for.
Yeah.
Most properties we do, we call them city projects. Like you'll have to widen the street for them.
Mm-hmm.
You'll have to add sidewalks for the city. You may have to run a water line that's not yours and pay for it. All that comes under the city jurisdiction. You pay for it, and it's publicly funded private projects.
Yes, but it is required.
It is required.
Yes.
We're doing a job right now in Alabama, and we have to put a street in for the city that does not go anywhere. But because they want that street, we have to put it in. We have to put the utilities in. That means we got to run power, we got to run water, and we got to run sewer. And we run it back about 1,000 feet, and the road ends, all of it ends, and it goes nowhere. It supplies nobody else, but the church is paying for it at a cost of probably $300,000 or $400,000.
Wow, and that takes quite a bit out of the actual project. That takes away from square footage in the building.
Yes.
From stage lighting, things that they may want to do in the building, but they're paying for it, and it's not really something that they're gonna even see or know anybody will even benefit from it. One thing you mentioned was retention or detention. I know that when we were looking at our property, they said that we couldn't do anything on that property that would adversely affect any other property down the line of the stream, which is why they regulate what's done, which is a benefit. If you buy a piece of property, you don't want people doing things that are going to adversely affect your property.
That's right.
But it's the same with you. Even if you own it, they still kind of tell you what you can and can't do with it. So talk a little bit about what is retention and detention and why they require that and what it means.
What their goal is for you to retain the rainwater on your site and to slow it down. What happens is when you put in a parking lot, it's not like raining on grass. It's when you put it on a parking lot or rain on a roof, it comes off immediately, and it comes off really fast. So you're putting a lot more water in the flood stream that would directly affect people downstream, could flood their properties when you get a lot of those properties that water's coming. So what they'll do is that retention will slow down the water and let it go off at a slower pace and make it so it just fits into the stream, less flooding, that type of thing. There is a cost in that, and you'll go by these properties and you'll see a big pond. Sometimes they'll make them wet. They'll have a big pond. Other times you'll see a dry retention. Either way, it's costly to do that, and it's an added cost to your project that you need to be aware of up front. That's why you hire the civil engineer. So you know those costs even before you get into your building costs, and yeah, you know what you're budgeting.
Yes, and then you know how much land you can actually
That's right.
use to build on.
Yeah, because it takes some of your land.
It does, and a lot of times you see people use them as sports.
Yes.
You know, maybe like a baseball field. They can use some of that area for
Yep.
things like that too. So it's all things to consider.
Yes. Well, the one thing that Tulsa did that a lot of cities modeled after Tulsa was a lot of the big sports fields are in retention areas, and so it really does work nice because they don't get flooded that often.
Yeah. What about finding out if the soil is good on a new site? I know it's a very expensive thing whenever a church comes to us and we find out they've got to haul soil off or bring soil in, or, you know, I mean, it just seems like dirt. You wouldn't think that dirt is expensive, but it's a huge part of their budget. And what do they need to do in order to determine that?
Yep. The one thing we do is, and all companies do, before you can move forward in your plans very far, you need to do soils tests. And what that consists of is you have a company that comes in, they drill holes, and they'll drill them anywhere from 50, 100 feet. And what they're looking for is they're looking for trash, they look for expansive soils, they look for bad soils, they look for sinkholes.
Yeah, we run into that
we
before.
run into that where we're on a sinkhole. But they look for all these inconsistencies. Now, that's a good picture of what's on your property. It don't tell you conclusively, but it'll give you different spots and tell you approximately what's there. Now, what happens is if you run into, like in this area in Broken Arrow, you run into a lot of expansive soils. And if that expansive soil is to a certain consistency, the engineers, before you put a foundation on it, will ask to remove all that soil. So you have to go in there and dig the soil out, then you have to bring in new soil, you have to compact it, and you build on top of the good soil. So it's very, very expensive.
Yes.
But based on that question, it leads me into site balancing.
Yes.
One thing that we really like to see churches do is look for a site that balances. Now, site balancing to us is that you don't have to take dirt off and you don't have to bring dirt on. So if you're not having to haul off dirt in these big trucks that are very expensive, the fuel is expensive, and you're not having to bring in dirt, then you're lowering your costs quite a bit. When I ride by a property, I went by a property with a pastor, and he was going to show me his property. He had paid, I think, about $80,000 or $100,000 for it, and it was way down in a hole. So as soon as I looked at the property, I was like, oh my goodness, it's going to cost him more than the property's worth to bring the property up and to be able to build on it. So a lot of times, if you have to bring dirt on or take dirt off, the cost of doing that is more than the property. And I see that in many cases to where they could pay $400,000 or $1 million, and I've seen even higher numbers than that, and you pay $500,000 or $1 million for the property only to spend $1 million or $500,000 to get the dirt right. So absolutely necessary when you're talking to your engineer, your civil engineer, to be talking about site balancing. You ask him, can we make this site balance? We don't want to haul dirt off. We don't want to haul dirt on. The other part of that is you don't want your building, when you ride by it, to be down in a hole. You don't want your building to be up too high. You want it to be good sight lines from the street, so you got good curb appeal. And these are essential. If I could work with you, show you the piece of property, and make sure you get the right piece of property, we'll probably save you more than our fees ever would be.
Wow.
Just in making sure that you don't spend your money on the wrong piece of property.
Yeah. I mean, it can be a costly mistake that can even prevent them from ever building.
Yes.
You know, we've seen churches that have bought properties and invested lots of money in the property, but then they couldn't get to the point where they had the money to actually build the building.
Yes.
So, you know, the purpose of this video and just anytime we speak to pastors is to help them to avoid these costly mistakes. That, you know, the goal is to be able to build the building and to get more people in it. But if you invest all your money in a piece of property, you've got a beautiful piece of land out there, but nobody no building to put your people in. So
that brings up an interesting point. I've seen on several occasions where a church will buy 100 acres. They're a small church. They got a beautiful piece of land, but they can't go get a loan because they're land poor, I'd say.
yeah,
They owe so much on this land where really they would have been much better off to buy 5 acres and have the money to go ahead and build something,
yes.
get in a new building and get momentum started. A friend of mine, Pastor Joel Sims, he talks about momentum, and I always enjoy what he has to talk about. But he says momentum can be created by a series of small victories. But a lot of times, this seems like a huge victory in buying a great big piece of land.
Yes.
But they need a series of small victories and to get in a building. That's what they really need. And this nice piece of property actually keeps them from moving ahead.
Yes.
And we see that on a lot of occasions.
Or a church that's getting ready to buy a piece of property that maybe there's not a lot built around them. Maybe there's some empty land. What do they need to look for as far as who's coming in around them? You know, what is the future plans of the property
Yes.
that they're looking at, and why would that be important to consider?
First thing I do is go to the city and see what they're planning for those areas. As far as new roads, it could be new highways coming in. There could be extensions of highways. And I would go to DOT and look and see what's planned. A lot of these highways, they're planned over years. We got a friend out in Texas that they're about to come through and take his property. And then one here in Tulsa that happened. A large highway came through and took his property. So you can tell where these are coming and when the expansions are coming. They're normally several years in advance, and that would really help you to plan to make sure you're right there where you need to be. You can watch Walmart, watch Walgreens, supermarkets. These guys study the areas. They know where they want to put the store. They know where growth is coming, and then there's feasibility studies that there are actually people who do those to show you what's going to be in the area and how profitable will it be. They do them a lot in business. You don't see them do them as much in church. But yes, I would watch those properties. And we were just talking earlier about a hospital in the area. And as soon as a hospital goes in, growth's going to happen around that. And not necessarily where you need to be or want to be. That's something you have to determine as your own church. Where do we want to be? Where do we believe God's calling us? And but know those parameters because it's going to be key if you grow to have access to highway, get people in, get them out. If you can't get them off the property, you can't get them off these small roads. It gets really hard to grow.
Now, one thing that we haven't really addressed, but I know it's really important with churches, is parking. And even if they go and maybe they buy, I know sometimes we talk about, churches going into an area, maybe where there's already parking established and how that can be a benefit.
Yep.
Or, if you move out into a rural area, what type of building to put up. So those are some things I think might be helpful with churches if they're looking to buy a piece of property, or even maybe one that's already built, maybe in a shopping center. A lot of churches are doing that now where they're having multi-site, and maybe they've got one on it. They've already built their main place, but they want to buy, in a strip center, a strip mall, and put, their second location.
Yes. A lot of churches are doing that. They're buying a big box or they're buying a strip center and they'll go in and move in. One of the main things you want to do is consider your parking. Make sure you have enough parking before you buy the property. And, I've heard this a lot. I'll say, they'll say, well, our requirements for our church, or the city wants us to have 4 people per car, and that's going to create a lot of parking. Well, here's what the deal is. The deal isn't what the city requires when it comes to parking. You need adequate parking. That's the most important thing. If you have, let's say you got a church that seats 300, and you got parking that you can't get 300 people in the building, that means you're not going to have those people coming to church.
Exactly.
So you need adequate parking. One thing that we find is, and this is an easy solution for churches, you can go in on Sunday morning, you can count all the people in your congregation, and then you can go out and count all the cars, and that will give you the ratio. That'll give you how many people are coming in those cars. And what we find is it's about 2.25.
Yes.
people to a car. So if you get by and you think, well, I'm getting by really good and there's 4 to a car, city's allowing me to do well, and you get into church and you don't have adequate parking, it don't do any good. If people drive on your parking lot and they leave, they're not coming back. You know, they're going to go to some other church. And so adequate parking is a big deal. I'll tell you a story. A friend of mine, he had been in a church for a long time and has had great success. And I was talking to him one day, and he said that his numbers were up. And I was like, well, what caused that, do you think? And he said, I really don't know. He said, we've been doing the same thing for years. I don't know, but our numbers are dramatically up. And his son said, well, Dad, we just put in a new parking lot. We got better parking than we had before.
Yeah.
So being accommodating, making things easier, making it easier to get in the building is going to add to your congregation.
Dad, what about these churches that maybe they don't want to build new, but they're out looking, they're going to buy an existing property, and you know, whether it be already a church or not, maybe they're going to transform it or remodel it and make it into a church building. What are some things that they might need to know and to think about before buying that building?
Well, Rachel, I love it when these guys buy big box stores. They can get in there easy. The parking is normally more than they need. The buildings are more than adequate. But there are some things you really do need to look for, and number one would be parking. You also need to look at the loads. And when I say loads, air-conditioned loads, is it going to be enough there? The other thing for a big box store or something you would buy would be, do you have enough load to carry your AV equipment? You know, some of these larger churches, you can hire an array of speakers that weigh 2,000 pounds.
Wow.
And they think they can just go clip that on the roof. Well,
yeah.
They're going to end up with a bad situation. It may cave in. So loads are really important. Then you run into a situation where there's a lot of columns in there, where it affects the view. So you're sitting in there and you got columns in your way. You can have those moved.
Really?
We've done several of them here at Rhema. I've done other churches. I'm doing a church now in New Mexico, and we're pulling some of the columns out. So that can be done. It needs to be engineered.
Yes.
So that it don't fall.
You want the building to stand.
Yeah. But the cost is not that terrible if you're buying the building right. And I've had several friends of mine that's bought big box and have done really well with them. So make sure the zoning's right. Make sure your loads are right. Make sure you can do what you want to in there. You know, one important thing is just comes to mind is the roof. Make sure it's got a good roof. Let's say you buy a building and it's 30,000 square feet, and you got a great deal on it, and you've got all your money in it that you can afford, and all of a sudden you find out that the roof's bad, and 30,000 square feet times 10, you got to spend $300,000 on a new
Wow.
roof that you don't have.
Yeah.
And so then it becomes not such a good deal. So make sure the roof is good, so you're in the building, you're not having to put out no major cash. But I do like the big box. I like the way people are going with the new churches and using things, using things that exist.
Now, what about a metal building? You've talked about this before, and the thought that not all metal buildings are the same. They're not all equal.
That's right.
And, not all of them can, people think, oh, well, we'll just come in and we'll make this look like a church and we'll put brick on it and stone on it and we're going to make it look really good. But, you've said you can't always do that.
That's right. There's number one, there's a lot of metal building companies out there. And I'll hear people say, well, I can buy this building for, $100,000. And you probably can. There's other things that come with it. You got concrete, you got plumbing, you got site work, you got all those things. And by the time you're done, we buy the buildings as cheap as anybody. We do just like y'all. We pass those savings along to the owners. The question is, do you know enough about the metal building to buy the right metal building to have those loads? You can buy a metal building and you think, well, I'll just get out there and I'll put brick on it when I get ready. And then you put the brick on it and the walls start falling off because the wall loads, the wind loads weren't sufficient. And they weren't engineered proper. And we see this happen all the time. We want to make sure when we do a building that the wind loads, the sidewall loads are all engineered for brick or whatever you want to put on it, or
Yes.
rock, so it's not coming apart. The other thing is, you're going to have to set air conditioners on the roof probably. And those air conditioning loads need to be in the right spot. They need to be engineered proper. It's not just buy a building, it show up on the site, and you cut a hole in the roof and you stick your air conditioner. Now, I've seen something like
Yes.
that, but that's not what you want to do when you're spending your money. You want to take some extra planning, and it really does take a lot of planning to do that. That's some of the biggest things we do. We spend a lot of time in those areas. And then for the AV, I just talked a little bit about that. You got to have pick points. You got lights hanging. You got speakers hanging. All these things weigh. If you got TV lighting, they weigh a lot, and they will pull your roof down.
Yeah.
And so you got to make sure when you're just buying a metal building that you're getting the right metal building. The other thing about it is, if you look on our website, you'll see a lot of really beautiful churches, and all of those buildings are what we call metal buildings. And in doing that, if you look, what a lot of people think a metal building is just a square box
Yeah.
with metal on the outside, and that's true too. A lot of cities, when you go, they won't let you put that style of metal building up. So what you have to do is improvise, make
Yes.
it beautiful, and it'll still be a metal building. You can make it a beautiful building.
Yes, they add all kinds of nice things to the outside.
Yes.
So when you look at the building, you're not just seeing metal panels.
That's right.
You see a brick facade or stone. You see, I mean, some of them have towers and all kinds
Yep.
of beautiful entries and windows and lots of things that make them, look like maybe they're not necessarily just a metal building.
Yep. It goes back to zoning and city regulations. You really need, if you're going to do a metal building, if you're going to do any building, go to the city first. Make sure they're going to be okay with that building, because a lot of them today aren't going to let you put up strictly a metal building, and you're going to have to make it look much nicer than that. And it goes to we did a job in Naples, Florida, and you have to have so many offsets on the building, so many insets on the building, every so many feet, the building had to change. And in doing that, it really does make it a beautiful looking building. It does cost more money, but to get through the city regs, we had to meet a 27-page regulation.
Yes.
And so, and some of you guys will be up against that.
Thank you so much for joining us today on the topic of location, location, location. If you'd like to see more videos, you can see them on our website at the Building Forward video series. Also, we want to be a blessing to you. That's been our goal today and with all the videos. So hopefully this has helped you in your building process. If you need more information, please feel free to contact us. We'd love to be a blessing to you in that way, to give you more information on your project and be able to assist you. God bless you and have a great day.